Hello, chess friends. Welcome back to another video here. And in today's installment, we are continuing the coverage of the Road to 2300 series. So, as you can see, the rating has fluctuated a bit um, since the last time we played when there was 344 days left. I do apologize for not being too active with the series. Been a bit busy, a lot's been happening this side. But I thought, okay, it is the weekend, there is some time. Let me do one for you all just to give you all an update. And yeah, a couple hours ago, I played a highly rated opponent, 2400 plus, nearing 2500. We played two games, and I was lucky enough to win both. But I'm gonna show you all guys the second game. So in this game, I had the black pieces, and my opponent started 1 to e4. Opponent starts with 1 to e4. I respond going c5. Standard response, the Sicilian. He goes bishop c4, indicating a lot of aggression. He wants to hit here, ASAP, get his pieces out, develop, get a quick game. I go e6 then. We in the bolder attack of the Sicilian defense. My intention is after e6 to thrust for d5 immediately, go for trades and kick the bishop away and just argue that I can have a big black center. So after e6, we have e5, which is considered inaccurate, and I go d5. Committing to the thrust. So, unpercent, he takes d. Knight c6 is possible, but bishop takes d6 is also fine, just recapturing and also just getting ready to castle kingside. After castles, both sides do that. White castles, black castles. And now we have d4. Takes. So, general rule in the Sicilian is if your opponent goes d4 and you have your opponent c5, you always capture 99% of the time. So c takes d, queen takes d, and here we have knight to c6. Of course, your e5 is also good. After e5, we have knight takes e5. Uh, and let me just show the line. e5, you could go here, queen to c7, knight to draw back, and bishop to g4. And the game just continues after bishop d5. Knight to c6, queen will drop back, or just bishop takes. I imagine now we could take, but rook to d8 is also good, just eyeing the queen. Queen would move back, and then finally you capture b takes c, with black being slightly better. All right, so d takes c, queen takes d, knight to c6, and then we have queen to h4. Very thematic. White's trying to set up this bishop g5 idea, just putting more pressure on the knight. So after queen to h4, I go knight to d5, proposing a queen trade, opening up the lines here. My opponent then, as the engine suggests, should go bishop to g5 and maybe f6 then, or the knight to drop to e7. But instead of that, to my surprise, my opponent goes for the queen trade, and I'm very happy about that because number one, it's simplifying the position, so it's easier somewhat to play, somewhat. And I mean, is a much higher rated opponent, so with the queens off, uh, the dynamic possibilities lessen a lot more. So rook takes on d, and now we are in a queenless late middle game, early end game. We have bishop to e3, and this is an inaccuracy because what it does now is, well, I'm trading my knight for the bishop firstly, and he has an isolated e pawn. So this will be a very important file going forward now because I have the half open, semi-open D file for my rook, and this pawn is very vulnerable. It's subject to attacks, maybe bishop c5, even attacks of the rook after the bishop moves coming into d2 later on. This bishop will develop soon. Well, we'll see how black does that. We go knight to d5 then, trying to initiate another trade, which is good for us. My opponent obliges, and now there's pressure on the b2 pawn. The bishop is eyeing there, so it has to be defended, right? My opponent does play c3, the strongest move, and now I decide to go b5 to sort of trick my opponent. So my plan here was after b5, well, if my opponent takes, I'll go rook. My intention was to go rook to b8, kick my opponent's bishop away. Okay, if you got when knight a3 as the engine suggests, just a6, bishop wherever, and this is what I had in mind, but seeing this was actually kind of bad. So it's a good thing we did not go for it. It would have been a pun actually. But before knight to a3 was played, after rook to b8, I was hopeful my opponent would maybe draw back, say bishop to e2. Well, okay, then we just take, right? And we argue him much better. Or even bishop to a4, same story. So actually knight a3 after rook to b8 is very important. It's a detail I did miss, if I'm being honest. So my plan after uh 14 b5 was to go, if the bishop captured on b5, was to go rook to b8. So not in taking into account knight a3, which was a very thematic move, important move, only move actually for white to keep advantage or to be slightly better. So my opponent blunders by going bishop to b3, and it's not something I anticipated because immediately after bishop to b3, I'm thinking bishop to b7. Engine is suggesting bishop to a6, maybe setting up b4 and attacking the rook on f1. But bishop to b7 is, I feel, a natural move because it's attacking on b2, on g2, sorry, and it's preparing this now. So the only thing really guarding the d2 square is this knight, right? And as soon as this knight moves, well, it is problematic because I just infiltrate on the second rank. The rook can also swing to d1, of course, but if that happens, it's not really the best way to go about it because now b4 is just putting too much pressure on these b2, c3 squares. Because if it captures well, it's just over. Rook takes, bishop takes, and bishop takes b2. That is resigns. It's a good knight. So after b4, you'd have to go moves like e4, which is really weird. Takes, bishop takes, and then finally you go rook to c8. King to f2 is suggested, and I guess soon you would capture, maybe not immediately, but I mean it's even fine that way, right? And you take back and you argue you are slightly better in this endgame. Look, it's plus minus 0, 0,1, so it's not much, but definitely worth definitely playing out, right? So after all that, we went bishop b7, knight to a3, which is the game-changing blunder, and immediately we go rook to d2. So now there's just so much pressure on this g2 pawn, right? My opponent goes rook to f2, and I missed a nice tactic of bishop takes on h2. Now I'll show you. With bishop takes h2, there was king to f1. After king f1, rook a to d8, thematic just doubling up on the d file, double Ds. Yeah, yeah. And say some top movies played like rook to e2, which is already so hard to find. Bishop to g3, just clamping down on the other dark square, taking away more space. E4, bishop to c6, knight to c2. It's just so hard. Takes on the second, the knight has to drop back. This game is as good as over because now rook's dropping in. This bishop's coming alive. It's not good for uh white at all. Because if the king even moves, let's say after rook to b2, king goes here, well, you just lose your piece for nothing, right? So the king is tied down to the knight. The knight is pinned to the king. The rook is pinned to the knight. Everything is just clustered up. But okay, instead of bishop takes on h2, I went for rook to d8, which looked more natural, but in actual fact it is a blunder because now after rook to f1, the position somewhat stabilizes because there's a lot of pressure on the f7 square with the double rooks here. And if I went f6, for instance, well, I would just lose a pawn for nothing, so which wouldn't be great. So example, if I go here, okay, well, I would start here maybe, and then maybe here. Okay, okay, but that would not work, right? So we drop back first. Anyway, that was not part of the analysis because finding this rook to f1 is so hard, which my opponent does not find. It just trades off when I take back. So generally, also quite thematic and a tip worth remembering is that um, the top authors like the late Jeremy Silman used to write that um, when the opponent is facing hardship in the position, as white is right now, what we generally try to do as humans in these difficult positions is to try and simplify, which is exactly what my opponent just did on the previous move. Thinking of the board, let's just go on. Perhaps it'll simplify and we get to a level end game. Because I mean, for what it's worth, if all the heavy pieces are removed from the board now, let's say the rooks and the minors, if they all had to go at the same time, and it's just Six pawns versus six pawns like this, as the structure is, and white had the first move with the king, could argue that it would most likely be a draw if played correctly. But because of the development of this rook to d1, rook takes g2 with check, king to f2, and now g6 just avoiding any back rank surprises. We have bishop to d5, which is quite a cool move, forcing the exchange. I have to take now. And if I take with a pawn, well, the king just takes. Although, yeah, fine, it's not the worst thing in the world, but it will suddenly just be level. King takes, and probably a6, yeah, just to solidify on b5. All right, but after takes d5, I have to go bishop takes d5, rook takes d5, and I go e takes d, king takes. And here, this is a winning endgame, but it's important to solidify this pawn by going a6. Instead of a6, I went b4, which is a blunder, equalizing the game, obviously not knowing in the moment. So my intention was if takes, I'll just take on b2 and knight to b5. And optically, I felt okay. I'm up a pawn temporarily now. It's going to level out after knight to c7 because both pawns are 4 by this knight, as you can see there. But it doesn't mean that I can't somewhat finesse a win here because that knight did seem a bit awkward for me because I'm giving up my d pawn exchanging and giving up the a6 pawn. So I was thinking of a construction where if I can get this bishop perhaps on d6, it would cut the knight off because the knight wouldn't have any squares to go to. But this was just somewhat of a long-term idea that's not obviously not a concrete one, but something to maybe work towards. King f8, a4, my opponent's doubling up. It looks a bit scary there. A and B pawns running. I go king to e7 to get to the other side. King to f3, king to d6, king to e4, and now just bishop to e5. Perhaps preparing this bishop to d6 and now attacking the pawn on h2. So h3 is correct. f5, kicking the king away, king to d3, and king to d5, gaining the opposition. So now, as the opposition's also gained, I am preparing this bishop d5 to somewhat try and scare my opponent. Knight to c5, and I do go bishop to d6. But now the knight could easily jump away to to b3 or to b7, right? And the game just continues because after knight to b7, or if the bishop drops wherever it goes to, let's say back to e7, I just go to knight to a5 and push the pawns, right? But my opponent goes knight to a6 and the position is lost. But it's important to find the correct move here, which is g5. G5 is creating an overload on this pawn, kind of like in rugby, when it's 2 versus 1, or in this case, 3 versus 1. Well, it will be 2 versus 1 if, uh, well, 2 versus nothing if we trade off, as is in this case. But the difference is on this side, my opponent's knight is so far from the defense, and the king will be overloaded as well. 2 versus a king, naked king, not gonna work. And this knight is also if you went b4, well, the knight can't really go, I mean, b4, b5. The knight can't jump to b4 because, well, we'll just capture with our bishop. Our bishop is exercising a lot of power on these squares here that I have aligned out. So after g5, we have a trying to go for ideas here to run it up. G4, H takes, F takes, and now it's simple technique just after B5. We go H5, creating a majority, while the majority is there, but just a supporting structure. And after B6, we go King to C6. It's important here not to go perhaps like H5 because then suddenly it's drawn, the knight would be able to escape again, right? So just this king to c6 because if this happens now, well, we just take, and this is easily winning. The pawn will run, we'll just catch it on b6, takes, and the king will end up coming here, but then our g pawn would run. So instead of all the funny business, we go king to c6, king to c4, and it's simple now. We just run the pawn. The king can't be caught. After g3, it was on move 40 upon reaching time control. Not really. And my opponent resigned the game. So yeah, guys, I just want to thank you all for tuning in. And yeah, it is possible, man. We are strong on the road to 2300, trying every day. Look, I mean, there are games I've played off the not the stream, but I mean, without recording, we have lost. and I'll cover some of those ones too, just to show the progress. But up one now as much as I can every day that I do play. So yeah, take care. And if you did like the video, please do consider liking, commenting, subscribing, and leave suggestions down in the comment section if you'd like me to cover any game or where I can improve on anything that you feel. So yeah, take care, guys. Have a good day.